Hi, I'm Veronica Henry and I'm going to read to you from the opening of A Wedding at the Beach Hut, which is going to be published on the 28th of May. It's a story about a young couple who want a very simple, straightforward wedding at the family beach hut in Devon. But as we know, there is no such thing as a simple wedding and things get complicated. I don't have a copy of the book itself, so I've printed out a copy of the jacket, which is suitably gorgeous, and who wouldn't want to get married there? Anyway, I've also had to print out from the manuscript as I don't have the proof itself. So here goes. The first orange-tipped butterfly to appear in Everdene that year was spotted by Robin Moss. She had no idea it was the first, but was delighted by the sight of it dancing across the dunes, skittering above the marron grass as if leading the way for her through the spikes, for it meant winter was firmly behind them and bright days were ahead. She tried to keep up with it as she ran from the track at the top of the dunes, where her truck was parked, down towards the beach, but eventually she had to accept that she couldn't. She paused to kick off her flip-flops, which were always a hindrance as the sand got deeper. It was cold, icy cold on the soles of her feet, as the early morning April sun was not yet strong enough to heat the ground. She stuffed the shoes into her holdall on top of her towel, and 2 warm pain au chocolat in a paper bag that she'd picked up on her way through. The shop in Everdene sold everything you might need for a trip to the beach, from bodyboards to sunscreen to sticks of rock, and it had a hot oven that served up temptation throughout the day. French sticks, fat pasties, roast chickens. Her mouth watered at the thought of the sweet, melting pastries, the perfect reward for the ordeal she was about to face. Though on days like this, she didn't mind that their resolution this year had been to start each day with a swim in the sea, unless the waves were really treacherous. She wasn't so keen when it was dreary and wet and the whole world seemed grey, the dunes, the sand, the sea, the sky, all blurring into one. Today, though, the colours were clearly demarcated. The grassy dunes were sage, the sand paled gold, the sea turquoise, and the sky powdery blue studded with white clouds. And in between the dunes and the sea ran a meandering row of beach huts, set out like a watercolour palette. Blue, red, yellow, pink, green. They were all slightly faded after a long winter of assault from the sea spray, and they were all different sizes and shapes and ages. Some were immaculate, some battered and well worn, and it was inevitably the latter, the huts that had been in the same family for years, that held the most interesting people. It was one of these huts that Robin was heading to as she ran down the steep slope, one of the first to have been put on this stretch of beach in the 60s, when summers seemed longer and sunnier and more innocent, and ice cream didn't melt so quickly. When people knew how to change a bicycle tyre and recognised the chirrup of a stone chat, and were happy to eat potatoes from a tin. Being only just 30, Robin had no memory of this decade, but she loved the fact that her boyfriend Jake's family had kept their hut almost frozen in time. Fondly known as the shed quarters, it had bright floral curtains and Formica kitchen units and cracked old leather chairs and a record player, together with a stack of retro LPs, the Beach Boys, Joni Mitchell, Neil Young. She and Jake often picked things up in charity shops to bring back there. It was a nostalgic hug of a place, somewhere to leave your troubles behind, pour a beer or a coffee and switch off. Jake, his dad and his brother Ethan were all crazy surfers, and one wall was stacked with surfboards and wetsuits, the air heavy with the coconutty scent of board wax. Robin surfed too, but it was out of the question at the moment. She wasn't taking any risks. She arrived at the front of the shed quarters to find Jake still asleep in the single bunk at the back in a tangle of blankets and pillows. She knew how warm and cosy it must be in there, and was tempted to clamber in and fall back to sleep in his arms. She'd made a decision not to shack up in the shed quarters with him when he moved out of his rented flat to save money, preferring to stay in the relative comfort of her parents' farm. "Come on, our appointment's at 9:30, we better get going," she said, prodding him. "I'll make you a coffee," which is pretty noble of me. Going off coffee had been one of the first signs. She'd taken one sip of her morning latte and thrown up, and hadn't touched one since. She flicked the kettle on as Jake headed to the bathroom, made him a coffee, then grabbed her wetsuit from a hook. The water was still pretty nippy in April, and she didn't want to get a chill. They set off across the beach, their fingers entwined. The tide was out, and it was a good few hundred yards across the damp sand, scarred with ridges from the pounding of the waves. Robin wondered if now was the time to mention what was on her mind. Probably not. Best to take it one thing at a time. Anxiety about the scan was making her thoughts whirl, and they would settle once it was over, she felt sure. It was weird, she thought, how one small change of circumstance could make something you thought you'd made peace with start to press on your conscience. You know what to do if you want to know what happens.